Hey, Lakeway Choir. I want to thank you and Mark for deciding to do this piece. We're coming down to it now. It's not long. And what I wanted to do today, since time is at a premium, is to give you a little bit of a background on what you're singing and how it came to be. Thought you might be interested in that. First of all, I get this question a lot as a composer. How did you start composing it, or what happened? Do you do the melody first? Do you hear harmony? Do you hear words? And I think for most composers, the answer is always whatever. Certain composers, I guess, have certain things that they actually do more than others. I guess for me, some of my best stuff actually is when I hear a melody in my head and then I work around that, and that's kind of what happened here. But even before that, the way this piece happened was really pretty casual. Mark was with some folks after church, I believe, and I was talking to him, and I think Joyce had played or shown him a couple of pieces that I had composed, and he said, well, that's pretty good. Why don't you write something for us? Just like that. And just like that, I said, okay, I will. And that was back in March. And so I wanted to try to write something a little bit tailored to you guys. It is challenging. I've been hearing that. But you guys are pretty good. In fact, very good for your amateur status. I mean, I'm used to writing for college choirs and things like that. So there are some challenging parts, and I commend you for doing what you've done so far on it. But basically, what I want to do is give you next a little bit of the textual basis, or how the text came to be. So we'll get to that in a second. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about how the text came to be, or the ethos, or the background, the spiritual setting for the piece. First and foremost, there's a passage in the Old Testament that I've never forgotten. I heard it about 40 years ago, and the way the guy was giving the talk on it, never forgot it. And mainly because we're so used to this Old Testament God as this big God, this huge, 40,000 slain in one day and all these miracles, the sun stops, the big theater God. That's our Old Testament, I don't know if stereotype or whatever. But here in 1 Kings 19, and I really encourage you to read that passage, we see a completely different God. And I can't go into all the context, but the previous chapter, Elijah, who was doing God's work, one of the only prophets left, he had this big contest against the Baalites, and you have to read 1 Kings 18 because it talks about this big contest where God versus the Baalites, and God, whoever altar would consume, the offering and fire, would be the winner. And let's just suffice it to say that God won that in a rout. And you need to look at that, because it was like Elijah's greatest victory. And yet after that victory, instead of everybody carrying him off on their shoulders, triumphing, okay, you've persuaded us, we're going back to Yahweh. The only thing he got was Jezebel, who was the queen of that area, who warned him, because of what you did with my Baal prophets, if you're not dead by tomorrow, I'll kill myself or have myself killed. She was that mad. And so all he seemed to have gotten for all this effort was humiliation. Nobody was patting him on the back, and he had to go flee. And so you can imagine he was so completely humiliated and just wiped out that he became suicidal. And he said, I want to kill myself. And he meant it. I want out. I obviously aren't doing anything for the Lord. I want to kill myself now. And rather than the big God coming in and going, I'll smite 600,000 for you, he actually is a completely different facet of the Old Testament God in this passage. And this is what he did was, Elijah went into a deep sleep, and then he woke, and there was some food there for him. So he tended to his physical needs, food and water. Didn't say a word. It was just there, very calm. God knew that Elijah needed to kind of get up and kind of just chill out, to calm. So he left him some food and water. Then he had a little bit more of a sleep. And then God actually came to him in a small voice. Does that sound familiar? And again, I don't know if I've really ever heard that in the Old Testament anywhere. But very gently, he said, Elijah, basically, you're doing great work. I'm here to restore you. Keep going. You matter to me. And so it's really one of the most uplifting, if not serene and calm chapters I've ever read. And there's nothing like it to me in the Old Testament. So that was the basis. Then there's some other verses. Psalm 71 has a lot of that stuff that I like about restoration in a place. And then Hebrews 4 actually talks, maybe for the first time in the Bible that I know of a physical place that you can take rest in the Lord. Prior to that, it just meant the graveyard. Like you're dead, you have a place of rest now. But this in Hebrews was a state or a place where you can continually be restored with Christ. And so all those things kind of tied together. And then the last part of the recipe was my friend Greg lives up in Virginia, and he's not a professional musician, but he has a way with words, and he's a pretty good lyricist. And just like with Mark, off the cuff, we just said, why don't you write something for me? I said, okay. I just happened to be talking to him. I didn't plan to ask him to write anything. I was going to do it. And I just said, can you write me something? And he goes, okay. And so that's how it happened. And so Greg delivered these lyrics. I gave him all the parameters, the stuff I just told you. He hammered out some really nice stuff, and we worked a little bit to chisel it out. And what you have is what you're singing. So that's how the text came to be and the spirit. Now talk a little bit about the music in a sec. So that's that. Okay, I wanted to talk for a second about the instrumental arrangements and how did this come to happen. First and foremost is the English horn. I don't think I've ever heard an instrument that's as happy and sad at the same time. Now in history, it's been used by a lot of composers to denote sadness or pain or whatever. But for me, it's almost like an optimistic, kind of a tears of joy instrument, almost a bittersweet thing. And so I don't think I've really heard an instrument that has that duality. It's happy and sad. And so I guess an example, I actually have a piece from the 60s that you probably heard, a pop tune called Abraham, Martin, and John, done by Dion, and it starts with an English horn. Oh yeah, we're here. I mean, you almost want to tear up just listening to that, right? It's just so gorgeous. So that had to go in there. Now, the piece was actually also patterned after very well-known work that you probably have sung or heard. Mac Wilberg is now the director of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, but back when he was with he directed the BYU choirs, he wrote a gorgeous arrangement of My Shepherd Will Supply My Need. And in it, he scored it for choir, of course, and then harp, oboe, and flute. Sound familiar? So I simply took the flute, switched it with the English horn, and then you have that antiphonal, like that relationship between the oboe and the English horn, different registers, like different volume or levels of pitch. And it just really works well for me. I really like that sound. And then, of course, the harp pretty much speaks for itself. Still difficult to write for, but I mean, it's restorative, it's water, you know, who's going to argue against the harp? It's just got that beautiful, quiet, contemplative sound. And so that's kind of where they all mesh in the piece with you guys. Now I want to get real quick to just a few little things that I did musically. It shouldn't be too complex, and that'll do it. So I'll do that in a sec. Okay, so I want to talk real quick about a couple of the musical things going on. I could talk a lot about a lot of musical things, but I think there's three that we can just focus on for right now. The first is the tune and the melody. Now in most more modern Western music, you have a 7-note scale, major, minor, do, re, mi scale, right? You have your major, right? And you have your minor, or however you like your minor. And so there's 7 tones, 7 different pitches. I know there's chromatic pitches in between, but basically the do, re, mi scale, you know, basically work with 7 notes. What I did, and what I like to do, is work more the modal or folksy kind of thing. Modal and folksy are not necessarily just the same thing, but they do kind of merge a little bit. And I always like sort of Renaissance sounding stuff, which also is very folksy or very modal. And so what I did is I kind of just didn't use 2 tunes or 2 pitches in the tune. So if you remember, right? So I do this. So I'm not using all 7 tones. And so the melody kind of wafts between these. And I like that because I can kind of mess around with the harmonies in there. But it's kind of a nice sort of pastoral thing. Now, the other part, harmonically, if you know my stuff, you'll know that I'm a child of the late 60s and on. And I kind of have a lot of pop and jazz background. And so, of course, we're all familiar with triads, right? Or the basic chords like do, mi, so. So if you play like a C, right? 3 notes, and you can double it, right? What I like and live and die on are the sevenths. I love major and minor sevenths. For major chords, I love major sevenths. For minor chords, I love minor sevenths. And so rather than just play your little C, right? And then to go up the scale, I like to add that 7. So here we go. Right, so we go add the minor 7th to D minor. And when those 7ths kind of go back and forth, you get a lot of dissonance that resolves, but it kind of adds a little bit of a, I don't know, 20th century feel to a traditional way. So in my stuff, there's a lot of, in this piece too, there's a lot of major and minor 7ths. I mean, at the very end, you have these B major 7ths to A minor 7ths. So you have a lot of that. And so somebody's not doubling a do, mi, so pitch. Each one of you very often are singing your own pitch. Now I add to that something that's called regression. And I love regression. And it's a little bit technical, but to make it very simple, the way I use it is I play with one chord and I go up and down from that chord. So in other words, if I'm on an A minor 7th, I go up to B flat, back down to A minor 7th, down 1 step to G minor. And I just go like a wave, up and back around that A minor. So you hear a lot of this. And when you have that, to me, it's kind of a symbolic of yearning, or, it's a little bit of tension, like, help me, Lord. Oh, yes. Help me, Lord. Oh, yes. So I get a lot out of a little. And so the harmonies are all going back and forth. And that's why you're singing a lot of what sounds dissonant. But I think it works out to where you kind of can feel the emotion, like the tug of dissonance and resolution, like the idea of resolution being, that's the chord I'm waiting for. And so that kind of played quite a bit, and that plays a lot in my style. I bring a lot of jazz and pop into what you call classical composition. So those are 3 elements. There are some more. Now, when we hopefully meet, I'll try to talk a little bit about some things going on in the piece as you're singing it. If we have a little time. If not, if Mark's running out of time or doesn't think he'll have time, maybe I'll make a quick video about that so you'll know what's going on as you sing the piece. But this is just a little setup for you. I hope it helped you, and good luck for the rest of the rehearsals, and I look forward to seeing it.